I'm really honored to be here. I know that we have many people from many countries, and this is the first opportunity for me to speak at such a large scale. So really honored for that. And I'm like Mr. Rasul said, I'm very passionate about education, and you'll see some new terms, new technologies. So my request to everybody is don't get overwhelmed, but try to understand the concept and try to explore, do your own investigation, your own research after this presentation, so that you learn more about this technology. So first of all, augmented reality has been there for last many years. It's just become more famous recently because of Microsoft's HoloLens and Google's glasses. So we'll talk about that as well. But today our focus is going to be how is AR going to help in education, not only general education, but medical education, construction education, and so on and so forth. So with that, we'll start the presentation. And of course, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box or work with Mr. Rasul, and we'll go forward with that. Oops. So let's start. First of all, the question is, what is education, right? It's a very simple question. And many of us probably know that, but we don't really think about it, right? What does education give us? Why not just be born and raise up and basically not go to school, right? So the simple answer is education makes us smarter, makes us intellectual, and also allows us to behave socially, economically, culturally in a very humane manner, right? So that we can behave as a civilized person, civilized human being, and be able to share our knowledge and help other people, so to make the world a better place. Now, it's a very tall statement, but the really simple answer is it's an act of learning, an act of teaching people in a very minute level or the macro level, right? So without education, a person becomes very close-minded, and that person becomes very self-observant, right? So with education, what you're doing is we are expanding our mind so that we can learn new things. So I like to state a famous quotation that education is not to be better in life, but the life itself. So what that means is that you're a lifelong learner. You should never stop learning, and that's the premise of education. Okay, so I just want to make sure everybody understands what education means, and we'll talk about some other forms of education. So with that said, let's talk about what does it mean to have quality education, effective education, right? Because the thing is, we can get education all day long, but what does it mean to have a really good education, right? The first thing is, as a learner, what do you want to do, right? Do you want to become a doctor? Do you want to become a civil engineer? Do you want to become a scientist? That is the attitude that is to start with, because without that, there's no goals and objectives. So as a learner, you have to decide, okay, what do I want to do when I grow up, right? That's the first step. And many of us are going to colleges and going to different universities, and that's great. So second element here is the learning environment, right? Because the thing is, unless you have a clear learning environment, you'll never be successful. For example, if I'm a surgeon, and if I'm getting training, but the training is done in a factory, right? It doesn't work that way, right? I have to be in a medical environment. I have to be in a morgue someplace. I have to practice my surgery. So that's the learning environment. So learner is the first step. Second step is the environment where I'm getting the training. The third element is the content. So the content is also important, because we hear many universities across the world, there says top 10, top 100. What makes them the best of the best is the content they use, right? So one of the things I'm going to talk about my content, as I was talking to Dr. Rasul, is going to be very visual. As you can see, I'll use very little text in this presentation, right? So the idea behind that, which kind of also reinforces our idea about visual learning, is that visual learning is the best form of learning in any forms between auditory and kinesthetic. All right, so the content is important, and of course, having the process in place. For example, if I'm learning about heart surgery, there has to be a step-by-step process for me to learn that practice and be able to use that practice to save lives, right? And finally, the most important element where we are here for is the outcome, right? If in fact, the whole event is based on outcome-based education, right? So unless you go through these processes of learning, environment, content, processes, you cannot have a good outcome. So in summary, let's say if I'm a doctor, if I'm learning about heart surgery, my main objective is to save lives and make the patient objective or outcome a better place. So in any, if you're any industry, scientist, civil engineering, construction, the outcome is the most important element. Okay. And again, you have any questions, please document those and we'll help you out. Now let's talk about what are the relationships, right? So essentially, let me just bring up my pointer here, just 1 second. So as you can see, the whole foundation of education is in the middle here, which is basically called worthwhile education. What that means is that when you go to school, you go to kindergarten, you go to elementary school, you go to high school and colleges, this is what you're learning, which is very, very structured, right? And it's very effective because it's being done based on a curriculum. Let's say if you're trying to become a math professor, right? So what you're learning is basically structured math from structured professors like Dr. Rasul itself. He's a professor as well. So the point is that worthwhile education is the baseline of every person in life, right? So now let's talk about the next 3 or 4 elements, right? Once you have the basic education, you can then expand that to something called compared learning, right? So as you know, the word compared is meaning forcefully, right? Now it's a very strong word, but compared learning is nothing but in some countries, some cultures, the government actually forces the people to learn certain elements, right? So that's compared learning. The next topic is called induced learning. Now, induced learning is similar to compared learning, except in induced learning, what you're doing is you're expecting some kind of a reward, right? So if you're a professor, if a professor is giving extra grade for doing something extra, that is called induced learning, right? So what you're doing is we're trying to do something, practice something, and learning from that, and that's called induced learning. Now, going to the left-hand side, the discovery learning is essentially whatever you can learn from experimentation. There's no goal, there's no outcome. You're just trying to experiment different things, right? It could be traveling, it could be doing some experiments in the lab, and that is called discovery learning, okay? And the last one, of course, is research learning, which is basically, it's a very disciplined, you have an objective. For example, a couple of years ago, we are working on finding a vaccine for the pandemic, right? And we had world's best of the best people doing research at the same time, right? So that's basically research learning. So essentially, as a person, as a human being, we face across all of these elements sometime or the other, right? And goes back to my point earlier that learning is a lifelong journey, right? And my recommendation to everybody is never stop learning. And I follow the same thing myself. And like I said before, I'm very passionate about teaching. So you can see my passion in when I speak. All right, moving on. Dr. Rasul, am I going at a good pace?
Yes, sir. Carry on,
okay.
Sir.
Right. So next topic here is going to be, 1 sec. All right, next topic is about the modes of education, right? So as you can see, there's about 12 different ways you can learn education, right? The first one is the visual. That's the most important element, right? And as you can see, I have a note here saying that we have actually research done by neuroscience that visual learning is the best because human eyes can process 36,000 images per hour. That's huge, right? So imagine when you're growing up as a child, you're always looking at things and learning from that. In fact, when the child is growing for the first few months, few years, they learn only through the visual aspects. So I'm just highlighting this to make sure that the visual element, which is through the eyes, is the best way to learn. And that's where it ties into the fact that we're talking about augmented reality at this point. And that's going to be the basis of the discussion. All right. So moving on, we also have something called auditory, which is you can listen to the people, learn from that. You can have some headphones, you can listen to commentary, and that becomes another way to learn, right? The third element is called touch or tactile, which is basically you can touch something. If something hot is hot, something is cold, and you're pretty much learning from that, right? So that's the second element or third element. And then, of course, as you move forward, we have something called kinesthetic, which is nothing but looking at something and working on hands-on. For example, if you're trying to build a home, right, you're actually doing the construction by hand, and that's called kinesthetic, right? And of course, we have sequential, simultaneous. So essentially, you can see all of these elements are important for us. So I'm going to cover maybe 2 or 3 more, and we can move on, right? So within that, we have also verbal communication, verbal education, which is essentially when you speak to somebody, when you communicate with somebody, that is called verbal education, right? So all of these elements are important. And of course, the most of the important elements are the interactive learning, which is basically working in groups and trying to understand by interacting with each other, right? For example, when you go to class in a college, you're actually interacting with the professor, and the professor is interacting with the students, and the students are interacting with themselves, right? For example, when you go to a lab, for example, you're doing an experiment on some chemical, chemical knowledge. What you're doing is you're talking to other people, you're trying to interact with each other, right? And then based on that, we also have something called reflective. So essentially, reflective is most likely going to be by yourself, sitting down somewhere and thinking about new ideas. Okay. In other words, it's called brainstorming in some cultures, right? So the word reflective is important because you're trying to reflect on what you're learning, right? And that's important for us. Okay. And of course, the next element is called direct experience, which comes from life experience, right? So this is where we have to think about, what am I learning today, which is going to be useful tomorrow, right? And one of the elements I like to point out is that when you do your basic education, let's say if you have a degree in mechanical engineering, right? You should always try to expand your knowledge towards other areas. For example, you may want to learn about business, right? So I've seen many people being constrained with what the degrees are, right? For example, if they have a degree in mechanical engineering, they'll say, okay, I don't know anything about business. I don't know anything about accounting. I mean, that may be true, but the thing is, we have the intellect, we have the foundation of learning new things, other things which are beyond our education, right? So that comes from experience working in the company over the years. And of course, indirect experience, which is looking at other people working on something, right? And of course, looking at the last one is based on some musical elements or learning from rhythms. So all these elements become important for us. And like I said before, we don't really think about this too much, but we are learning constantly, either using one of these or all of these. Okay. So that's basically the modes of education. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that and be able to capture that. All right, moving on. So this is kind of a nutshell based on a previous discussion. So all the things we talked about, education could be separated into 3 different areas, right? Number 1, the formal education, which is our foundation that we talked about, right? The non-formal, which is learned outside the school by some instruction, structured, maybe home education, by somebody coming to our home, tutoring us. So formal education is the meat of the whole education, which you're learning from going to school from kindergarten all the way to college. And then non-formal is learning from outside the school, but still it's structured. The last one, informal, is basically there's no structure to that. You're learning from anywhere you go around. You're looking at different things. You're driving your car. You're going in a public transit. You're looking at things and trying to absorb things, right? Or you're going to take a class, a dancing class, for example. That's basically an informal learning. So all these education types play a role in us to develop our mind and be able to communicate with other people. Excellent. So Dr. Rasul, how are we doing on time right now?
Yes, sir. It's only 15 minutes done till now.
Okay. Excellent. So what I'll do is I'll basically explain a little bit more of these things so that we can actually understand. Are we getting any questions so far, Dr. Rasul?
Not now, sir. So I will take you the questions when I get.
Okay. Got it. All right, moving on. So this is a very important element. The talking about the transformation, like Dr. Rasul said about going to the present condition of augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, right? So what we did was took a snapshot of 100 plus years going back into the history, right? So to be specific, if you look at back in the 1900s, 1920, there was nothing technology-wise. There is just a desk and a chair to learn from that. So essentially, the educators, the professors, probably brought something in the classroom. I'm not sure whether they had white blackboards or not, but at that point, it's very, very physical, very, very rudimentary, in the classroom, right? Now, did people learn from that? Absolutely, because the thing is, people learn, adapt different things based on the technology. So at that point, technology was just like I say, a sitting desk and a chair, right? And because of the way they're educated, and by the way, I was doing some research on education. Education actually became more and more structured in many countries recently, because previous to that, it was not mandatory to be educated, right? That's interesting, isn't it? All right, so moving on from 1900s to 1923, for the first time, at least in the US, in Western countries, the classroom started seeing radios in the classroom, right? So that brings a fond memory. When I was growing up in India, I was actually going to school, and in those days, I was listening to cricket, right? Cricket matches, and I used to take a small radio and listen to the commentary on the results of the match, right? But in this case, we are talking about using that for education, right? So for example, in this case, it's possible that some professor may be using the radio to talk about, let's say, learning about construction, learning about mechanical engineering, or just the basics of education, and that was used to transmit the information. In fact, for many, many years, the radio was the main way to communicate and main way to educate people, right? And as we move towards the 1930s, right, this is where we first saw, the overhead projectors, right? I'm pretty sure everybody is using those or have seen those before. The nice thing about overhead projectors is that you can actually take a slide, or basically take a page and put it on the projector and be able to show it on the screen where people can see it. Now, is it as the best technology? Probably not, but at least it is visual and gives you the presentation of for the people, so that people can learn from that. Now, as you know, these days we are so used to PowerPoints, using blackboards. I'm not sure, Dr. Rasul, are we using any of these in your college at this point, or projectors?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are using projector.
Excellent. So that's great. So essentially, the overhead projectors gave us the way to project something for the first time in history, right? And then as you move towards 1933s, as you can see, they used real movie projectors or film projectors. In this case, at that point, we have silent films because sound was not integrated into the movies yet, right? And essentially, just imagine that way back, we call it silent movies, where it's black and white, but they use these projectors to project these images, right? In fact, many of the movies, if you can see from the World War II and before, were black and white and they're silent, right? And then as we move forward, the first TV appears in the late 1930s, right? And as you know, TV brought a revolution to the whole world, and that way you can see what's happening either real time or something that happened yesterday or happened a couple of days ago, right? So television was a huge invention, and as you can see, that was used to use in a classroom in Los Angeles, for example, and was able to communicate and educate people, right? And moving on forward, 1950s, we had the headphones. And I remember I have when I was in India, I used to use a Walkman, which is the technology back then, 80s. But headphone was a great invention as well, right? Because with the headphones, you can actually listen to different things with a very focused elements. We talked about auditory learning before. So combined with, let's say, television as well as using the headphones could be a very powerful way to learn, right? And guess what? In the late 1960s, early 1960s, we had the whiteboard, which is basically, either use whiteboard these days or blackboard. The point is that the having this chalkboard was a huge invention as well, because now you can actually write something and erase something as you need it, right? And the benefit of a whiteboard or a blackboard is that a lecturer, a professor can actually write something on it and be able to communicate pretty much real time, right? In fact, when I was growing up in India, when I was going to engineering school, we had only blackboards to learn, right? We didn't have all these technologies, and we learned it that way, right? And then, of course, as you go towards the early, mid 60s, there was the first development of a programming language called BASIC, right? Many of us may not know this, but BASIC was the first language to be invented, and that was used for many, many years to follow. And that was one of the ways to develop a simple application and be able to use that to communicate to people. All right. As we move forward towards 67, the first Texas Instruments calculator was developed. And as you know, many of our engineering folks use that calculator in our exams, in our studies. But these days you have a lot of sophisticated calculators using, programmable, where you can do multiple complex, solutions at the same time, right? So this is just one section of the history, right? So let's move on. So next section, right? So next section, we had the invention of the cassette, which you can see that, we can have something recorded on a cassette, which some of us may have seen this before, some of us may not, because technology is changing so fast that many of us may not have seen it. But the beauty of that cassette itself is that you can record over and over again and be able to share the information, right? In fact, many of the authors used to have books, audiobooks on cassette players, right? And we use that to learn new things, right? So the point is that, like I said before, learning is a lifelong journey, and all these tools that we have are just tools to learn, right? These are not the solution, but at least helps us to educate ourselves, right? And then moving on, we have some new developments, which is called a Scantron, which is nothing but using an automated way to grade people. For example, if you're taking a multiple choice test, right, where you actually darken the different aspects of multiple choice, this machine will actually grade your answers based on the correct answers, right? So as you can see, as the time went by, technology was slowly introduced and helped us to understand, different aspects of education. And by the way, many of us know that most of the developments, as you can see, happened in the last 100 years, right? We had development X-rays, for example. We had development in, a CT scan. We had development in many other industries, of mechanical engineering, civil engineering, and we'll talk about that as well. And then moving forward to 84 and 85, as you can see, 84 was the first Apple Macintosh computer invented. Now, in those days, I remember distinctly that there were two groups of people, right? People who liked Apple and people who liked the regular PC, which is basically based on Microsoft. And there was distinction because Apple people used to think that, oh, we are special because we like this technology. But for the longest time, Apple was not able to break into the main commercial marketplace because they could not use the applications that are developed by for Microsoft and PCs. So that's why they were kind of special, but at the same time, they were not able to break into the main commercial platform. Okay, that changed, as you know, later on, right? And of course, we also have these nice devices where you can actually type something quickly. So this is probably the beginning of texting, I would think. But this is a great way to capture notes and capture your communication, right? So as you can see, as we went through the technology, as we went through the different elements, things started becoming more and more progressive. And essentially, now the beauty of a transformation or technology is that as the new children are born, they actually adapt to that technology, And the people who are still learning that, still a little bit behind. All right, so let's move to the next slide. I think after this, we'll take a break after this. So this is, it takes us to the present almost, right? So with advent of 1988, this is where the first laptop was invented or introduced, right? As we know, it changed the whole demographics of education, because with a laptop, it's basically a computer in a very, very portable format, right? You can take a laptop anywhere you want and be able to use that to either type something, record something, or be able to use it for PowerPoint presentations. So it changed the whole demographics, because now the PC or the Mac, which was essentially stationary, now it became portable. And that gives us a huge element in education, right? And then moving forward to the 1990s, we had the CD-ROM, which is basically CDs, and followed on by DVDs. So CD-ROM broke the whole cassette structure, and brought about super high definition music and education to the world, right? So that gave us that clarity, that gave us the precision of using that education on a CD-ROM, right? And moving forward to 1991, we had the smart boards, which is the nice thing about that is going from the whiteboard, which is using chalk. Here you can actually write something, and it could be actually saved onto a computer, right? That's why they call it smart board. And essentially, the nice thing about that is that you don't have to erase anything. Everything is done automatically. And that was the beginning of something called smart, right? And of course, as we move forward, we have, using the internet access. So just to let you know, many of us probably know this, that when the internet was started, people thought, oh, it's just going to be a fad and it's going to go away, right? And that's why people were not prepared for the explosion that happened after the fact. And the next few years, the internet actually became worldwide, and essentially now we cannot live without internet, right? And of course, as we move towards 2012, we had the first iPad developed, which is basically another product from Apple. And of course, Apple brought up another revolution, which is the iPad, and of course, iPhone later on, which actually changed the whole demographics of portability, functionality, and also be able to communicate with people, right? And last but not least, which we know today as smartphone, which is iPhone or any other phone, Samsung, which actually becomes a necessity. In fact, when I go outside someplace, I cannot go outside without my phone, because everything is in the phone pretty much, right? You can take pictures, you can text, you can record yourself. So that's brings a whole new dimension to the whole transformation. So this is just the beginning of the transformation. As we move forward, you'll see where we are headed and what it means for us next few years. All right, Dr. Rasul.
Yeah, sir.
Any questions?
Let me check, sir. So till now, we didn't get any questions.
Okay.
In the chat box.
All right. So I think we are going at a good pace, right, Dr.
Yes, sir.
Rasul?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So let me know if you think you need to if you want me to slow down or speed up, I'll do that. Okay.
No, it's going great, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So moving on. So this is where we jump into the concept of augmented reality, right? So what is the definition of AR? Some of you may have heard this, some of you have seen this before, but a simple definition is that creating something of a 3D object, three-dimensional object in a virtual format, and be able to interact with it in real life. For example, as you can see in the picture here, the kids are actually looking at some objects, but the objects are not real. They are three-dimensional objects, but they're virtual, right? So what is the benefit of augmented reality? We'll talk more about that. But essentially what it does, it gives you to expand your imagination, be able to understand, and essentially going back to my point about visual learning, like we said, visual learning is the best way to learn something, right? So what augmented reality is doing is bringing the 3D experience in front of you, whether you're doing heart surgery, whether you're designing a building, for example, you can actually bring the 3D model in a virtual sense in front of you. In fact, towards the end, I'm going to do a demonstration of a couple of items, and it will give you an idea of how powerful this technology is, right? So I know that many people have not heard this before, have not experienced this before, but as I'm going to show you later on, that is coming very fast. And part of the reason we're having this discussion is to make sure that we make people aware of this technology, right? Early on, Dr. Rasul mentioned about artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? And those have been there for a long time now. And of course, the definition of the AI or ML is that how can we use the computer machines or the machine learning to learn something, adapt something, right? For example, if I'm in education and I'm teaching a course, right? So what the AI will do is actually modify the content based on each individual person based on their assessment. So for example, if I'm let's say John Smith, and I know what I'm learning, but my level of learning is not as high as the other person, right? So what the AI will do is basically look at your perception, look at your knowledge, and change the content based on your understanding. So that's brilliant, right? So let's talk about the history of augmented reality, and I want to show you that many people think that this is a new thing coming up, but actually it was first done back in 1968, right? And at that point, it may not have called AR at that point, it may have been called a different name, but that is the first instance of augmented reality, which probably was done in a lab somewhere. And of course, as we move forward, right, the term augmented reality is created, right? So really quick, in general, there are three types of reality that we are familiar with. The first one is called real reality, which is what we're doing now. We're speaking, we're learning real time, right? Second element is called augmented reality, which actually what you're doing is you're using a mobile device or some kind of glasses to create this augmented reality and be able to observe that object in real life, right? The third one, which we don't cover in this course, is something called virtual reality. I think most people are familiar with that. The virtual reality is fully immersive, which is actually what you're doing is you're wearing a goggles around your eyes. And what you're doing is you can interact with the objects, but not in a real situation. Essentially, everything is virtual in this case. So again, the reason we selected augmented reality is it gives you the benefit of learning. At the same time, you're not fully immersed into that object itself, okay? And of course, as you move forward from 1990 to 94, the first concept of AR was introduced in the theaters and cinemas. And as you move forward, there are a lot of developments happening along the way, right? For example, 2000, there was a toolkit built with an open source library to be whoever wants to build an AR model. And then as you move forwards, it was introduced to the media. And of course, as you go into 2013, for the first time, AR was introduced into the automotive industry. Now, you may ask the question, what do you mean automotive industry, right? So imagine that you have these huge machines being operating in an assembly shop, right? And what it does, AR can actually give you a 3D model of the whole machine, and you'll be able to operate that virtually, right? Just imagine that, right? So what that does, it gives you the benefit of learning that machine itself in a very, very safe environment, right? You don't have to go into the actual plant. You can learn it, anywhere you want without getting yourself in a danger, right? Now, as you move forward towards 2014 and 2015, 2016, Google and Microsoft came up with their own devices, right? In fact, one of the most popular elements right now is called the Microsoft HoloLens, which is used heavily into the medical industry. And we'll talk about that as well, right? So this thing stops at 2017, but today, AR is being used in retail, is being used in commercials, using in ads, using in construction. So it's an explosion about to happen, right? And this is where we are right now. And I'm assuming that everybody who's from different countries, you have some exposure to this technology. My request to everybody is to go back and research and be able to educate yourself and see how powerful this technology is. Okay. And of course, please give us your questions and we'll answer those. So this is the first exposure to augmented reality. So there's three types of AR. And essentially the first one is called marker-based augmented reality. Okay, as the name states, the way this works is that you need to have a marker, for example, a picture, an object, or something that will trigger something else. Okay, for example, in this picture, what we're showing is that we have a picture of a building, right? And by using the augmented reality feature, we're actually able to create a 3D model of the building in front of us. And just by using a mobile device. Okay, so you can see how powerful it is, right? So this technology is very, very simple from that perspective. But with this technology, you can actually project anything. It could be, you can be playing a movie, you can be showing a 3D model of the building. So marker-based AR is something that triggers something else while you're using the technology, right? And the whole purpose behind this, and the nice thing about this, is that you don't have to use any special devices. You're just using any mobile device. It could be an iPhone, Samsung, iPad, Android. As long as it's a mobile device with smart features, you can use that to create this technology. Okay. Moving on. Second type is called markerless based augmented reality, which is basically does not require any special marker. You can be projected. So this is based on a GPS. So essentially, as long as you know the coordinates of that location, you can create this augmented reality feature and be able to project that at a certain location, right? For example, many of us may have heard about the game called Pokemon Go. I'm not sure if anybody played that or not. But the way the game was created was that objective of the game was to follow this Pokemon and be able to follow that object any part of the world as long as you have the coordinates, right? So this is again a very powerful feature for, let's say, if you're advertising for your location, for your shop, for your store, or your features, you can actually do that using this markerless based AR. Okay. The next one is called a projection-based AR. So this is where the powerfulness comes in, especially for medical industry, right? With this, what you can do is you can actually project a whole structure, whole object in front of you and be able to operate that in real sense. So for example, let's say if I'm building a home, right? And if I want to simulate the actual building in front of me, and let's say if I'm focusing especially on some kind of appliance, for example, if I'm focusing on the heating and air conditioning, for example, right? So I can literally start and stop that heating and air conditioning machine or system just by using technology, right? Now, other thing that's useful for, like I mentioned earlier, was that in many of the factories, many of the plants, it's not very safe to go and do the safety training or the training because of the elements. For example, if I'm working in a chemical plant, right, there's always a danger about having some kind of a reaction, some kind of an injury. So this is a great way to learn outside of the environment in a very, very safe manner. Okay, so to summarize, the three types of AR: number one, marker-based AR, markerless-based AR, and projection-based AR, right? And reason we're saying all of these is that somewhere in the future, you will be using these on a real, in a commercial sense. Okay, let's move on. How are we doing, Dr. Rasul?
Yeah, very fine, sir.
Right. So let's talk about so what I've done is, what we have done is basically broken down the augmented reality into multiple parts. We'll start with education and training. So essentially, as you can see here, this is just one example that many of the biology students, they like to dissect frogs, for example, right? So in this case, what you're showing is that you're showing the whole inside of the frog just by looking through this mobile device, right? And the benefit of that is basically that you can actually create, this kind of gives you an idea about what can be done for not only for biology classes, but also for medical classes. We'll cover that in a second. So essentially, like you see, is that all we're doing is using a mobile device to learn something, right? And when I say learn something, we're not just reading something on the screen, but you're actually seeing an object in front of you. For example, if I'm learning about the digestive system of a frog, I can basically show that on my mobile device and be able to learn it. So that's how powerful it is, right? All right, so let's move on. So let's look at some examples of how this technology is useful in education, first of all, right? So first of all, you can actually develop some interactive models. For example, if I'm learning about, let's say I'm a scientist and I want to learn about a chemical reaction between two different chemicals, right? So I can actually create those interactive models and be able to see what happens when I mix two elements, right? Or for example, if I'm learning, if I'm a mechanical engineer, I'm learning about, let's say, I'm trying to learn about gear systems. So what I can do is I can actually create the models of the gears and look at those in real life situation. Okay, so that's really powerful. And again, going back to my point, that anything visual, anything interactive is going to give you a much better way to understand things, as we know, right? And of course, as you move forward, you can also do some visual simulations, right? So for some of us who have done engineering, mechanical or civil, we have software available these days, which is lets you do some simulations. For example, in Unigraphics and other software, what you can do is you can actually build the model of the object. Let's say if you're building a seat, for example, you can actually do simulations to see what happens in a crash situation if you're using the seat for aircraft, right? So this is just another element. So with this technology, what you can do is you can actually build the real object and be able to simulate that in real time, right? And of course, the beauty of this technology is that most of the applications do not require any special goggles or glasses. They only require your mobile device. And like I said earlier, it could be an Apple device, it could be a mobile, it could be an Android, any of those devices, right? And as you go through this process, the main takeaway from this is that essentially it creates an immersive experience, and also it gives you the real life concept of learning something, right? So that's the nature of this. Is just some of the activities that we can do with AR and education, but as you can see, is really powerful technology. All right. So next thing we'll talk about is augmented reality in construction education, right? So as you can see very visually, actually earlier I was talking to Dr. Rasul and he was saying that visual way is the best way to explain things, right? So I'm hoping that this is kind of projects the image of what it means to us, right? So imagine that you're a construction worker on building a new building, right? So with this technology, what you can do is you can project the whole building in front of you and be able to make sure that everything is proper, everything is a proper place. And as this is clear picture of what you can see, right? You can see that this is the real situation where you're using this big machine to start doing the construction feature. But this is basically the AR feature. So what you're doing is you're projecting the virtual image or the model of the building on a real subject, right? That's how powerful it is. So essentially what it does, it does many things, right? Number one, it gives you the opportunity to experience that everything is proper as designed, right? And many times in construction, what happens is that whenever we design something, we always have some error, some level of errors into the actual application, because when you go to the actual construction site, you may find out that, by the way, that particular wall is supposed to be where it is, right? And secondly, I've talked to many construction workers or construction people that this feature actually helps you to take something in a very small feature, because in general, in a current situation, what happens is that the construction workers, they take the drawings, the paper drawings with them, and these drawings are really huge, and they have no place to put it down on any flat surface because there is no flat surface. So with this technology, all you're doing is taking your mobile device, your iPad, iPhone, and be able to project this a model into the real life situation and be able to make sure that everything is by the design, right? And last but not least, as you can see, that you can still see some of the real life machines in the background, right? For example, we can see this and so on and so forth. So basically what you're doing is you're combining the virtual object in the real life. That's the beauty of AR. All right, let's move on. So as you can see, there's many different things within construction education. Some of them kind of overlap with general education. But like we said before, using the simulation aspect of a building, where actually you can project the building in front of you and be able to actually go inside the building, which I'm going to show later on as an example, that gives you the benefit of using that technology, right? And of course, one of the benefits that goes with any education is using your mobile device, like we talked about, right? And then of course the concepts. So this is where education comes in, right? So this is so in the future, the estimation is that many of the colleges, many of the education facilities will use some kind of a visual means, and learning using the augmented reality is probably one of the best way to learn, because it makes it very, very visual and allows you to simulate things, and also most importantly validate your design parameters, right? For example, many of us know that when you design a building, you have to make sure that structurally it's safe and sound, first of all, right? And secondly, you have to make sure that it's designed per code and built per code, right? And of course, as you go through the design changes, you can actually automatically change the design into the AR model and be able to see that everything has been updated and everything has been brought to the latest version of this, right? And of course, last but not least, we talked about the workers on the field. They'll be able to take this model on their mobile device and be able to project it on the actual site, right? So all these elements become really powerful in construction at this point, right? So now let's talk about medical education, right? So what we'll do is we'll probably take this slide, go to the slide and take a short break. So as you can see, one of the most powerful applications of augmented reality is going to be in medical education, right? And the beauty of that is I was watching some videos. The best way to describe this is to make something invisible into more visible fashion, right? Because the thing is, when you go to a doctor's office, there's a lot of assumptions that the doctor have to make, right? They have to know your history, medical history. You have to look at your age, your weight, your your all your chemistry, body chemistry, your pathology, right? And based on that, you'll make an assessment of what kind of medication that person is to get, right? But with this technology, what you're doing is you're bringing everything into one perspective. So later on we'll talk about this, but essentially what you're doing is you're trying to we actually shouldn't I shouldn't say trying to, I should say we are actually combining 3 or 4 technologies into one, which is basically you're combining the your x-rays, your MRIs, and also your CT scan, right? So traditionally what happens is that when you go to doctor's office, all those elements are looked at individually. But with this technology, you're actually trying to combine them into one feature and be able to see that through real time, right? So the benefit of doing that is not only you're able to diagnose that person accurately, but you're able to do surgeries, which you learn later on about surgeries as well. So essentially, think of this as a magic crystal ball where you can see the different elements of a person in real time, right? So I know that many of us are not familiar with this technology, but in the US, we had essentially one of the first surgeries done at Johns Hopkins University, where a person was actually, operated on using this technology, where the person was actually suffering from spine injuries, and this technology was used to do a safe surgery. Okay. All right, moving on. So as you can see, the healthcare industry is very, very, rich with visual aspects, right? So let's go back. What is the biggest benefit of this technology in healthcare, right? So the first major benefit, of course, is if you go into medical school, right, where you're starting out your education, first year, second year, third year. Many of us learn from either pictures, videos, and maybe 3D models, and maybe some students may actually see a cadaver, which is a dead body. But with this technology, you can actually be able to see the 3D objects in real life in front of you and be able to practice surgeries or different situations without actually doing any damage to anybody else, right? Because every person is different in terms of what their body structure is like, and essentially this gives you a powerful way to treat and do surgeries upon human beings, right? So the other thing that you can do with this technology is that many times when you go to doctor's office and the nurses are trying to give you an injection, they're not able to find your vein, right? So with this technology, what you can do is you can overlay your own human anatomy of your vein onto your arm itself and be able to find that vein which you could not find otherwise, right? Again, it's a simple thing, but sometimes it becomes very frustrating for the nurse and the doctor who are trying to give you this medication, right? Of course, and as you move forward, as you improve the outcomes of these surgeries, at least in US, there's going to be less lawsuits and less malpractice, lawsuits. So that gives you the accuracy of a surgery and be able to improve the outcome of the surgery, right? So one of the things I like to mention here is that whenever we go for surgery, we always told that by the doctor that they're going to try their best, right? And they cannot guarantee whether they're successful or not. With this technology, we're not saying it's going to be perfect, but at least it improves the possibility of a good outcome from that, right? And then, of course, as we talked about before, when you go to doctor's office for regular visits, they can actually diagnose a person in a much better way than otherwise, right? So all these elements will become a powerful source into the medical industry and any other industries. All right. So I think we'll take a 5-minute break, Dr. Rasul.
Yeah,
Any
yes,
questions
sir.
that I can answer?
Uh, we received one compliment for Lisa only,
Okay.
which is, I mean, great session, Dr. Irfan.
Okay. Is a comment?
It's a compliment.
Okay. So, okay. Thank you. It's a Lisa.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. I really, like I said, I'm very passionate about this, and I try to make it visual, and essentially, as you can see in my voice, that I really, I'm a visionary. So as you can see, we learn about more things. So let's take a 5-minute break and come back at exact 11 o'clock. I think it's going to be 11:30 your time, 10:30 your time, Dr. Su.
It's 11:23.
Okay. So let's come back after 5 minutes, about 11:28.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, you can start, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Su.
Yes.
Any other questions, comments, compliments?
Uh, no, sir.
Okay. Do we know how many attendees we have roughly?
Exactly, I don't know, sir.
Okay. I'm hoping that we have a large audience.
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. So let's move on. So essentially, I think everybody's trying to get the point now that technology is powerful. I know that some of the countries may have not seen this before or not heard this before, but this is the future. Okay. And we're here to talk about the future, right? And many times what happens is that when you talk about the future, people get overwhelmed, right? So the objective of this session is not to get overwhelmed, but to learn from this and be able to do some research on your own so that you can apply this to your own life. All right, so let's move on. So next topic we'll talk about is design, right? That should be bringing a smile to Dr. Rasul because he's an MTech, right? So Dr. Rasul, when we went to college, when I was going to college, right, we had nothing like this before, right? We didn't have any features. We actually see that in real time, right? So as you can see, the beauty of this technology is that you can see these arrows here, right? So what this is doing is giving you the important functionality of that particular design, right? So without this, we have no way of showing something on the screen in real time, right? For example, let's say in my past experience, I was involved in designing actuation system for aircraft seats, right? So many of us know the aircraft seats, you have different types of designs. You have the business class, which is luxurious, the first class, which is more luxurious, and of course you have the economy class. Now, the actuation system was primarily designed for business class and also for first class, because in these classes the seats actually become flat, right, where you can actually sleep while you're traveling long distances, especially transatlantic. Now, if you compare what you're seeing here, right, what you can actually do is you can actually simulate the whole actuation system in front of you and be able to see that is everything working per design or not, right? So in this picture also you can see that we not only have this particular machine, one machine, I also added one more machine, and we're seeing the whole simulation of this process without actually being there, or at least not close to it, and be able to see it from far away, right? So these days, many of the companies are using this for maintenance as well, where let's say if the person is let's say in China, and that person is doing maintenance on a machine in China, a person in the United States will be able to guide that person over the internet, of course. So this is very powerful. So the other thing I like to mention here is that product design wise, coming from mechanical background, the biggest challenge of the design itself is not only doing the design, but to be able to communicate the design to not only ourselves, but to the customer, right? And the beauty of this technology is that as you make changes to the design, you can actually project the same changes into the AR, right? So in typical product design, project management, when you start the first design, you're able to design it, let's say in a 3D software, Unigraphics, AutoCAD, SolidWorks, but you can use it to share with people. But with this technology, you can actually bring that whole 3D model in front of you on a table and be able to look at it together across the globe. Okay, so that's the beauty of this, right? All right, so let's look at what are the benefits of this technology for development, for product management, right? Project management, product design and development. So first of all, like we mentioned before, is that we can develop high resolution immersive models of these objects and be able to share that across the globe, right? For example, if somebody's your engineering team is in Asia and then your manufacturing is somewhere else, we can actually bring these models up on the some from front of you and be able to share that, right? So I guess the question from Dr. Rasul, will augmented reality be the future of experiential learning? Absolutely, right? Because the thing is, this is just the beginning of education, and essentially, you must have heard the term called holographics, right, Dr. Rasul? right?
Yes, sir. This is the only question we got.
Okay, perfect. So yes, absolutely. So the fact is that this is going to be giving us a whole new benefit of experimenting, doing a real life situation where you actually bring up the model in front of you and be able to interact with it. So the major element here is the interaction, right? Because one of the things I mentioned earlier on is that with any product design, you can do 3D models on 3D software. You can share the screen with anybody itself, but you're not able to actually interact with that model in a real sense, which I'm going to show you later on, right? So that's number one, development of high resolution models and sharing across, these models, right? And of course, like I said before, you can share it across the globe and access it through, many different ways, right? Now, the benefit of that also is because as the design matures, right, you can actually modify your AR models and be able to share that with your customer and other stakeholders, right? And of course, as you move forward, the same design is updated and almost real time, right? So coming from engineering background, coming from technical background, this is a huge benefit of this technology, that you're able to change these models in real time almost and be able to share that. Now, one of the things I like to mention is that I don't want to leave with the impression that augmented reality is the solution for everything. It's not, right? It's not replacing anything else. It's a complement which is helping us improve the product design, for example, improve our construction, and improve our medical outcomes. Okay. So let's look at the next topic, which is basically using it for manufacturing, right? So many of us who know manufacturing, it's a very difficult task sometimes, because manufacturing is a big wide world in education itself. Because manufacturing all the way starts from where you start to manufacture something from scratch. It could be a component, it could be an assembly, it could be something else that you're doing, right? This is kind of an exaggeration, but the point is that using a mobile device, you can see the whole assembly in real time and be able to actuate it and see how it works in real life situation, right? So one of the things in manufacturing I like to mention, being from Six Sigma, is that we're always trying to improve the processes, right? So with this technology, what you can do is look at the whole object, right, and be able to actuate the object and be able to say where we can improve the design so that we can improve the efficiency. That's one aspect, right? Second aspect is, let's say if you're trying to improve your design, your area within the manufacturing, right? And let's say if you have multiple machines next to each other, right? What you can do is you can actually create a virtual model of the machines and be able to project that to the actual location and be able to see what is the current roadmap or the current state and the future state of that particular facility, right? So essentially, like I said, this is giving us a whole new dimension of applying these things and be able to improve the outcome, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's engineering, whether it's medical outcomes. Okay, so let's look at some of the benefits in a same sense that manufacturing, right? Basically, so first of all, we talked about the training aspect, because manufacturing is all about training, making sure that people are working in a safe manner and also working efficiently, right? So with this, what you can do is you can actually develop a whole new 3D model, AR model, and be able to teach people on something like assembly instructions, right? In fact, there's a company in US called Light Guide Systems. They are also based in augmented reality, but their main business is to show or to make it simple on how to assemble things step by step. So let's say if you're doing, let's say, electronic assembly for an automotive, automotive project. So what it does, it actually projects the whole assembly onto a flat surface and shows you how to assemble that particular item, right? So again, this is just the beginning of this technology, and many of the companies are using it, including companies like Toyota and such, right? Now, we talked about virtual simulation. So I want to make sure everybody understands the term simulation, right? Simulation is something that is done in a virtual sense without actually using the actual objects, right? For example, when I was doing the actuation systems, we used to actually simulate not in the 3D dimension, but also making some individual sub-assemblies and be able to try it out so that we can find out what the ultimate goal is, right? From business perspective, if we do good design, if we have good manufacturing processes, it will reduce the number of returns from the customer, right? As you know, some of us who are in design, sales, and in quality, we know that whenever there's a return from the customer, it always shows up as bad on your reputation as a company, right? And of course, as you move through the customer returns, the main thing, of course, is the improved market share. So if you're a business trying to improve your market share, it all works out that if you have the team working with augmented reality in manufacturing, product design, ultimately it gives you the immense improvement in market share, right? So the last item here is visual and immersive planning, right? So when I was doing design and manufacturing, and essentially we use something called picture planning, which was nothing but if you're trying to build a small assembly, right? So what we did was we took pictures of the step-by-step assembly and put them in the assembly area, right? And what that gave the operator was to look at the step-by-step process and be able to assemble correctly. Now think about this. If you use this technology, all they have to do is bring up their mobile device, right? Look at the assembly area, and automatically it will play a video for them using the marker-based AR. So that's how powerful it is. So I'm going to take some sip from a coffee. 1 second. So hopefully everybody's having a good time so far. So the best part is yet to come. Okay. All right. Any more questions, Dr. Rasul?
No, sir.
Okay. So as you can see, that this is just the beginning of this iceberg, right? We're just kind of starting to see that the exploration, the explosion. So let's start with the space industry, right? The space industry is using it or planning to using it for simulations to make sure that when the astronauts go into space, they are in a very safe environment, right? So that's so essentially, it's growing in that area. People are using it to simulate things. And of course, if we talked about medical education, as you can see, this person is actually looking at a heart. Looking at the picture, it will automatically create a 3D model of the heart, right? So going back to my earlier point, that if you can use the technology for children, even in a high school, middle school, elementary school, there's no boundaries, right? Because the thing is, many of us learn about the human anatomy most likely when they go to medical school, right? So imagine that if you're going to school in a regular school, let's say in a high school or middle school, if you use technology, the people who are looking at these objects will be much familiar with anatomy, and when they go to medical school, they will be able to further enhance their knowledge, right? That's the beauty of this, right? And then as you move towards aerospace and military training, right? So again, as you can see, using the AR technology and using the goggles or using the mobile device, it's showing us that in this case that the engine's running. Again, this is to kind of simulate the actual object itself. And of course, you can use the training. You can use it to make a situation where you're going into the battlefield, right? And in some cases, what's happening is that the AR is also being used for critical situations, so that people will understand how to behave in a situation. For example, maybe an earthquake, maybe some disaster, right? So like I said before, this is just the beginning. And of course, we talked about manufacturing and training itself. And of course, last but not least, the AR in education in the classroom, right? So as you can see, you can actually bring up the whole solar system into the classroom and show it to the students and tell them, okay, this is Earth, this is Mars, and so on and so forth, right? So like I said before, this is just the beginning of the iceberg, or the tip of the iceberg. And essentially part of this discussion is to make sure that everybody's aware of this technology, and it will be a game changer for sure. Okay. Move on. So as you can see, that based on our previous discussion, that the marker-based AR is going to be about 86% of the distribution of the types of AR. What that means is that people will be using the trigger mechanism almost 86% of the whole distribution within the AR models, right? And then 11% will be location based, and the combination will be 3%. But as you can see, the majority of the marketplace will be based on marker based AR. Okay, so it gives you an idea that you can use a mobile device by itself, or you can use goggles, glasses to make it more efficient. On the same lines, you can see that, going back to my earlier point, that mobile devices will capture about 57% of using it for visualizing the AR access, and of course desktop 24%, AR glasses 6%. So the message this slide is presenting is that whatever mobile device you have is going to be very, very useful in the future, especially when it comes to education, right? So it could be your iPhone, iPad, it could be your Android, Samsung, whatever it is. It's saying that mobile devices are going to be one of the best ways to educate yourself using augmented reality, right? And the good news is, of course, is that the augmented reality glasses is only 6%, because the thing is, at the current time, the glasses are not very economical. They're expensive, and they require a full system to do that, right? So that's the benefit. So again, the estimation or the forecast is that we will have majority of these devices by mobile devices. Okay, all right. So now this is another staggering fact that based on my research, as you can see, that by 2025, which is 3 more years, we are planning to spend $338 billion across the whole globe, okay? And the number shoots up from that to $1 trillion by 2030, right? So basically, you're almost tripling, quadrupling a number from, let's say, 350 billion to 1 trillion, right? Just imagine how. So the point I'm trying to make here is that if you're thinking about jumping into this technology, thinking about going into business, going to do something with this technology, the fruits are going to be huge for us. Okay, so I'll let everybody absorb that. Now, being that said, the VR is also going to progress, right? But it's going to be progressing at a slower pace, going from 138 billion to 450 billion, about half the market, right? So the point is that each of these will have a special application, but augmented reality, which have much, much more, applications. Any more questions, Dr. Rasul?
No, sir.
Okay. So with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of demos here, and I'll try to do my best to share my screen, because what I'll be doing is I'll be using my phone device, and I'll be sharing my screen on the main screen, and then I'll be able to share that screen with you. So just bear with me, okay? So Dr. Rasul, I may need your help, but let's kind of just see what happens first of all, right?
Okay, sir. Carry on, sir.
Sure. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start my mobile sharing device, right? And then make sure that we all see that. All right, starting now. Give me 1 sec.
Okay, sir.
All right. Let me stop share for 1 second. Okay, running some challenges. 1 second. So, by the way, Dr. Rasul, did everybody get this presentation?
Yes, sir.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
So if this doesn't work, what I recommend is that they can click on the link on a mobile device and be able to experience it. But let me try once again. That will see if that helps us or not.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. I think I got it. 1 second. Thank you for bearing with me.
You're welcome, sir.
Okay. So let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen, first of all. Okay. All right. So does everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to project this image, right, onto the screen, onto the floor here, right? So my voice may be gone for a second, but essentially what I'm going to show you is the demonstration of this rover, okay? So what I can do is I can rotate this object just by my fingers, right? And what I can do is now is I'm going to view in my space, right? Okay, so do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So the beauty of this, Dr. Rasul, is that I can zoom in, right? And I can walk around it, right? As if it's a real object,
Oh,
right? So let me make sure my image is correct.
yes, yes.
1 sec. Okay. So as you can see, right? I'm gonna get up now. I'm going to walk around it. Right? So
Yeah.
do you see that? Right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So now what I'm going to show you is another example. This is a structure actually. Just give me 1 second. And hopefully everybody is able to imagine, experience what I'm doing right here, right? Hopefully. So next example is going to be a garage. So let me make sure I rotate that. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a structure. Okay. So again, I'm going to view my space, right? So this is a big structure, but it's minimized because of the size, right? But the beauty of this technology is that actually I can actually walk inside this virtual structure. You see that? I can zoom in. I can walk inside it. I can look at the different structures, right? So the beauty of this is actually what it's giving us is the magnitude of understanding not only the structure, right, just on our fingertips, right, and be able to play with it, right? So that's the beauty of this technology, Dr. Rasul.
It's wonderful, sir.
And the question came up previously was, okay, how does it benefit from education perspective, right? So the simple answer is that when you say something visually, right, you're able to play with it, you interact with it, and that's the beauty of this technology, right? So let me go back to the summary here, just 1 second, so that we all capture, what we learned from this, right? So in summary, what we're saying here is that based on research, the human eye can capture 36,000 images per hour, right? And of course, making that visual learning the best way to learn things and experience things. And as far as technology goes, this is just the beginning of the technology. And what my recommendation is to the everybody in the audience today is to look at this technology from your perspective, whether you're an engineer, you're a business person, you're doctor, right? Go back and look at what is the benefit of this technology, because this is just the beginning. And reach out to us, either Dr. Rasul or myself. So basically, our company is called Supernova Academy, and I'm assuming that everybody has access to that. So just go online. You can send me questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer those.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Rasul,
I request all the participants, you can share your questions in Vertex chat box.
Okay.
Then we can answer the questions.
Sure. Are you sharing, Dr. Rasul?
Yeah, till now there is no questions here, sir.
Okay.
We'll wait for a couple of minutes, then we'll
Sure.
see.
Okay, that's fine. So while you're waiting, so hopefully this
Yeah.
was a good eye opener for all of us. And like I said before, everybody has the presentation, and I'll really recommend everybody to play with the links, couple of links that I sent in the presentation. I'm not sure, Dr. Rasul, did they get the PowerPoint or did they get the PDF? Do you know?
It's a PowerPoint.
Pardon? PowerPoint?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So yeah, if it's a PowerPoint, usually the link will be embedded into that. And not only that, plus the individual types of augmented reality, there's links to that. You can play that video and see how they work, right? I didn't play it here because I thought it will be not very, time consuming, will be time consuming. So my recommendation is that reach out to us. You have my contact information, and you have, IN4 OB as well. Either way, we'll get back to you, in a very decent fashion. And again, just be the leaders and pioneers in this new technology, and I really appreciate that. Do you want to add anything, Dr. Rasul, in terms of what we talked about, or what your thoughts are?
No, sir, it was, I mean, wonderful session.
Thank
You
you.
enlightened us with your knowledge.
Yeah. So the other thing I was mentioning earlier, Dr. Rasool, was next week I'm going to a conference in Vegas, and this is called AI 4 2022. And the whole purpose behind that is to use augmented reality and artificial intelligence and machine learning for medical functions. So there's going to be a lot of medical presence in that conference, and I'll be speaking in front of those audience, talking about augmented reality in medicine. So I feel really honored for that as well, and of course I'm feeling honored today as well to be able to present this education, and hope to be doing more sessions in the future.
Yeah, of course. So we thank very much for joining this workshop session of the InfoBE Global Virtual Summit. I thank Irfan Khan, sir,
Thank you.
so for your, I mean, great session with us. So have a
Thank
great day
you.
to everyone. So now let's wind up the session.
Thank you, Dr. Rasool.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye, sir.